We'd go downtown, and she'd say, well, I'll wait in the car. You go ahead and get the medicine or something. And I remember I'd be relieved. We'd go over to Battle Creek, Michigan, in the last week of August to get your school clothes, and supplies and everything. And I remember as we walked around, I was always conscious about, will anybody recognize me? My mother came to every football game I played in from 9th to 12th grade. But in 4 years, she never got out of the car. Never once that I can remember. I think she was self-conscious of it. I loved her, but I was embarrassed with her. But I resented my parents as parents because they didn't love each other. They did not love each other. I think most of us growing up, we grow up envying other people's parents every once in a while, especially, you get your allowance cut off, or you get grounded, your dad grinds the key up to the car. He always say, well, I wish I had Bobby's parents. And then there were times he was probably saying, I wish I had Josh's parents. But I grew up all the time envying other people's parents. I would date someone and go over and I'd see their parents together. I'd see them laughing together, coming out to the door to say goodnight to their daughter and hope she comes back. You know what impressed me? Now, it might not mean anything to you guys, but I remember when I'd pick up a date, I cannot tell you what it meant to me. And the father would come over and put his arm on my shoulder and say, now, son, you go easy tonight. I remember this one man said to me, he says, son, I'm entrusting to you one of the most precious things in my life, my daughter. Wow. I mean, I drove 15 miles an hour slower with that woman in the car. But that meant something. It really did. That meant something to me. I came on staff at Campus Crusade, and I really think that I work with some of the neatest people in the world. I really do. I think I am fortunate to work with the people I work with. I can honestly say when they thought I had cancer and they were going to have to go in and operate, and I walked the streets of Seattle a few years ago, and I evaluated my whole life because it was colon. They thought for sure 2 great big tumors in my colon, and that means you're gone. And I remember I went out to walk the streets that night. If I had my life to live over again, what would I do differently? And I remember one thing I concluded. One, I'd be married to the woman that I'm married to. I'd have the children that I'd have. And I'd want to work with the people that I work with. There's no group of people on the face of the earth I'd rather be associated with than Campus Crusade. And if I was on Navigator staff, I'd probably say the same thing. Not the Navigators. This one staff member of ours was on the Newlywed Game. This was the old Newlywed Game. And they asked, the husband went out and asked the wife, the number of people your husband works with, how many does he love of the people he works with? And he said 6,000, or she said 6,700. Everyone in the audience. The audience got, and the guy, I forget who the MC of the program was, just kind of like, what do you mean 6,700? Well, we're on staff at Campus Crusade for Christ, and he just loves everybody he works with. Well, people didn't even want to cut for a commercial. There was tension in the air. There was excitement, when the husband came out. And it was unbelievable. And boy, the MC milked it for all it was worth, and came up and said to him, how many people do you love that you work with? He said 6,780. He missed it. But let me tell you, the crowd started chanting, give it to him, give it to him, give it to him. But what a testimony on television. Well, I feel that same way. And I became a traveling speaker There was a time when our staff, as Crusade as an organization, we started to mature and they started to have children and everything. And I would stay in their homes, and I'd see the way they loved each other as a couple. I'd see how they spent time with their children. They played with them. They talked with them. They listened. They did. And I remember night after night going to bed and just quietly in my own heart just kind of crying. And saying, God, I want that. Oh, I was envious. I remember I dated Paula, who I almost married. We dated for 3.5 years. She has a set of the most beautiful parents. I used to look forward every time I went over to just being with her parents. I told her once, I said, I can't believe I said this. I said, Paula, I don't know who I love most, you or your parents. I mean, you'd have to have a good self-image to be told that. And I remember many times driving over in graduate school to her house, and it would literally be going through my mind, who am I most excited to see, her folks or her? And her dad, I remember, sometimes would say, why don't you stay in here and have dinner with us tonight? I go, yeah! One, it was cheaper. Second, I wanted to be with him. But you know what I found out? I found that my resentment towards my parents... Now, this was subtle. My resentment towards my parents turned to resentment towards God. And I started to blame God. And I didn't realize the transition. I can't even actually tell you when it took place. But when it surfaced, it was when Joe Musser, who wrote the book Johnny, the biography, called up one to do a biography of me. And the first time around, I thought he was kidding or pulling my leg. He said, no, God has really laid on my heart to do your biography. I said, Joe, you got to be kidding. Nobody wants to read about my life. I'm an ordinary guy from an ordinary farm. He said, more people can identify with an ordinary guy from an ordinary farm. So after about 3 years of calling, I said, okay, and now I understand why. God had my biography done to use Joe in my life to work something through as my attitude about my parents. I think you see, whenever you have a biography done, they spend hours with your enemies, hours with your friends, and then for hours upon hours, days upon days, they just grill you. They go over everything you've ever written, said, everything, and analyze it. And then they get into your motives. And I think through a lot of the hours of interviewing me and everything, I think Joe saw something come up. And we were at the old hotel where I live. It's the oldest operating hotel in the state of California. And we rented a big room there, the honeymoon cabin actually, so I could stay there, so I'd come in and stay late at night or whatever. And about 9 o'clock, he said to me, he said, Josh, do you like who you are? I said, yeah, I do. I know, as a Christian, many people say you're not supposed to say that, but I do. I like who I am. Doesn't mean I like everything I do, but I'm not what I ought to be. But I'm not what I used to be. And by the grace of God, I'm not what I'm going to be. But I'm sure enjoying the process. And I've learned to be patient with myself. God has always been more patient with me than I have with myself. He said, do you like who you are? And I said, Joe, I really do. I said, there's a lot of things God's going to change in my life. He said, Josh, do you like the way God's using you? And I said, Joe, I'm very thankful that God's using me. He says, who do you think God has used most in your life to make you who you are? He named off a number of people and everything. I said, no. I got off into my parents and he said, Josh, who do you think God has used most in your life to make you who you are right today? I said, my parents. He said, that's right. Then he quoted Romans 8:28 to me. He said, Josh, from what I know of your life, Romans 8:28 is a living reality. I said, what do you mean? Romans 8:28 says, he will cause all things to work together for the good. It doesn't say all things are good. It doesn't say that. He says he will cause even bad things, bad background circumstances. He will cause it to work together for the good to those who love him and are called. And he said, Josh, you are a fulfillment of that verse. God has used many of the things with an alcoholic father and everything else, which wasn't good. Or weren't good. And he's used them in your life for the good. He says, you know, maybe you need to forgive your parents and ask forgiveness of God. He left. And I struggled with that until about 11:30 that night. And I remember I got down on my knees, got all that resentment out there. First thing I did was confess my resentment to God. Because you see, I knew I didn't choose my parents. I didn't say, well, that woman. I didn't flip a coin to see where I was going to be born. I knew it wasn't by accident. Then I knew God chose my parents. And God don't make any accidents. And so I said, God, forgive me for my resentment, my lack of trust. And then I verbalized, even though both my parents are dead, I led my father to Christ, and I found out in the most miraculous way that my mother had become a Christian when she was 15 years old. And I just verbalized, even though I don't believe they could hear me, I verbalized my confession to them. And one thing I had to start on, I had to ask my parents to forgive me. Because you see, I realized that I wasn't the best son in the world. So I asked my parents to forgive me for many of the things that I did that were dishonoring to them. Then I verbalized to my parents. I wish I could say it was easy. It wasn't. I mean, it probably took me 15 minutes to get the words out. But finally I just said, Mom, Dad, I forgive you. All I can say after that 2-hour struggle, it was like just a big burden rolled off my shoulders. And a joy came into my heart. And right there, an anticipation and anxiousness came into my life that I'm really looking forward to seeing my mom and dad in heaven. And I remember when I walked the streets of Seattle, that's exciting to me. I walked the streets of Seattle that night when I thought I had tumors in my colon. And I remember and I have to admit there was a fear of death. And I didn't want to leave my wife and my children. I just couldn't imagine leaving Dottie and the 3 kids. But there was that excitement, I don't know how to verbalize it. There was an anticipation of seeing my mother and father and a face-to-face saying, thank you for being my mom and dad. Amongst all that frustration, everything I was going through, there was that excitement that came out. And let me tell you, when I get to heaven, right after I see Jesus, before I even see Paul, I want to go to my mom and dad and thank them. And I can honestly say right now, there's no one on the face of the earth I'd rather have had as my parents than Edith and Wilmot McDowell of Union City, Michigan. I wouldn't want any crusade couple I've ever met. I wouldn't want Jim and Vivian Simpson, Paula's parents, to be my parents for anything in the world. I was set free to celebrate my own parents. No, they weren't the most perfect parents in the world, but I wasn't the most perfect son in the world either. I was set free. In an area that many of us need to deal with forgiveness with our parents. I just wish I could have done it before they died. And I share that with you, because probably 50% of you here need to deal with some things in relationship with your parents. And I would encourage you to do it before they die. I've been personal tonight, but I've done it because I care. And maybe some of the things I've shared tonight, God will use in your life to see forgiveness become a reality.